You take your family to a national park because it is supposed to be safe. That is the unspoken promise, isn't it? The glossy brochures with the snow-capped peaks, the smiling rangers at the visitor center, the paved trails and wooden signs and educational pamphlets about wildlife. America's national parks are sold to you as sanctuaries, vacation destinations, places where city stress drains away and your kids can finally breathe clean air and see real stars. You stand in the parking lot, mountains looming all around, and for a moment you actually believe the marketing. You lock the car, you sling on backpacks, you tighten little shoelaces and hand out water bottles. The air is thin and sharp. Somewhere above you, a raven calls. You walk past the entrance sign. What you do not realize is that you are stepping into one of the largest unsolved mysteries on the continent. Every year, people disappear in America's national parks and surrounding public lands. Hikers, hunters, children, experienced outdoorsmen who know how to read a compass and build a fire. Tourists who just want to see a waterfall and get back in time for dinner. Most of the time, there is an explanation. People get off trail. They fall. They get hypothermia, heat stroke, altitude sickness. They drown in rivers. Animals get to them before search teams do. The wilderness is dangerous, and when you combine that with human error, tragedy is inevitable. But there are other cases that do not fit. Cases where a child vanishes from right behind a parent's back in a matter of seconds, with no tracks, no sound, and no sign of an animal attack. Cases where the missing person is found days later, miles away, on terrain that would break a trained climber, wearing no shoes, with their feet uninjured. Cases where clothing is found neatly folded, placed on a rock, but the person who took it off is never found at all. Cases where scent dogs follow a strong trail, and then, at a very specific spot in the forest, that trail simply stops, as if the person walked into thin air. Researchers started collecting these files under one shadowy phrase: missing 411. And the deeper you dig into those patterns, the harder it becomes to sleep in a tent in the woods. Before we go further, you need to understand something. There is a real book series and body of work that uses the term missing 411 to describe clusters of strange disappearances on public lands. Those books compile real cases, real people, real families whose lives have been shattered. Out of respect for them, we are not claiming to solve those cases here. What you are about to hear blends documented patterns with theories and folklore that have grown up around them, particularly one of the darkest theories of all: the so-called feral people living in the deep wilderness. Is that theory proven? No. Is it official? Absolutely not. But if you talk privately to enough rangers, search and rescue, personnel and backcountry law enforcement officers. You will hear the same thing in their voices when the subject comes up. They do not like talking about it, and they do not camp alone very far from the trail anymore. The pattern starts small. A cluster of missing kids in one national forest. An old hunter who never came back. A young ultra runner training for a race who vanishes on a well-marked trail in clear weather. Then you add more cases from other parks, other states, other decades. You stop looking at individual tragedies and start looking at the map. You circle point after point: Yosemite, Rocky Mountain, Great Smoky Mountains, the Cascades, the Sierras, Adirondacks, national forests with millions of acres of dense timber, remote canyons, glaciated peaks, deep ravines filled with deadfall and boulder fields. You see something that should not be there. Clusters. People go missing in certain very specific areas under very specific circumstances, again and again. And again, here is one of those circumstances. There is a family in a national park, let us say, somewhere in the Rockies. Mom, dad, a few kids, maybe a grandparent or two. They are walking a well-maintained trail, not far from a campground. Other people are around. It is not remote backcountry, just a pretty day hike. The youngest child is excited, running a few steps ahead, bending down to look at flowers, scuffing the dust with his shoes. At one point, he steps behind a boulder or a tree, barely 10 or 15 feet off the trail. His father's eyes shift just for a second. Maybe he looks at the map. Maybe he turns to say something to his wife. When he looks back, his son is gone. No scream, no crashing leaves, no sound of an animal. Just an empty space where a child was standing moments ago. What follows is always the same. At first, the family calls his name, thinking he is playing hide and seek. Then they start to shout, running up and down the trail, ducking behind trees, panic rising. Other hikers join in. A ranger is alerted. Within hours, a full-scale search is underway. Hundreds of people, helicopters, drones, search dogs, thermal cameras, the kind of operation that could find a lost wallet in a forest, let alone a child. They grid the area. They comb the creek beds and ravines. They bring in divers, cadaver dogs, psychics, anyone who might offer a thread. Days pass. Nothing. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a shoe. Not a drop of blood. Not a track in the soft ground. It is as if the earth opened up and swallowed him without leaving a hole. In another case, a hunter with decades of experience enters a familiar area before dawn. He knows the basin. He has shot elk there for years. He walks in under a clear sky, wearing bright orange, rifle on his shoulder. He never walks out. Search teams find no sign of him. No broken brush, no dropped pack, no sign of a struggle. His wife insists he was too skilled to just get lost. So where did he go? In yet another, an elderly woman hiking with a group on a wide, easy trail grows tired and sits to rest on a log. The others agree to loop back in just a minute or two. When they do, she is gone, vanished. Her walking stick is propped against the log. Her footprint is in the dust, but she is not there. There are hundreds of cases like this. Each one, on its own, could be explained away with enough hand-waving. But then you look at the details that keep repeating. Dogs who refuse to track or track a scent in a straight, strong line and then stop dead, circling in confusion, whining, tails between their legs, dragging handlers away from certain areas like something there terrifies them. Bodies found in places that had already been searched 3, 4, 5 times. Sudden weather events, violent storms, white out snow, thick fog that roll in almost immediately after the disappearance, hampering search efforts in ways that feel almost timed. Victims found miles away and thousands of vertical feet above their last known location, barefoot, without cuts on their soles, sometimes with their clothes neatly removed and folded nearby. It sounds less like a random series of misfortunes and more like the work of something deliberate, something that understands the land better than we ever will. There are many theories. Some people swear it is all mundane, human error, bad record keeping, confirmation bias, nothing more. They will tell you it is offensive to the dead to turn their tragedies into ghost stories. Others point to UFOs, portals, and government experiments. But there's one theory that keeps crawling back up out of the dark, again and again, as if the forest itself is whispering it between the trees. The feral people theory. The idea that deep within the vast, unmapped tracts of federal land, there are human beings who do not live in towns or cities. They are not on census rolls. They do not pay taxes. They do not have social security numbers. They live in caves, in old mining shafts, in abandoned cabins swallowed by moss and ivy. They drink from tributaries no one visits. They move by night. They are not homeless in the way you think of homeless people in cities. They are off the grid in the most literal sense and have been, some say, for generations. Inbreeding, isolation, and a constant battle for survival have warped them into something that is not quite what you and I recognize as human anymore. They know the ridgelines and ravines far better than any ranger. They can move silently over deadfall and rock where tourists twist ankles and call for help. And sometimes, when the opportunity arises, they take people. Before we go further down this path, it is important to draw a hard line. When we use the phrase feral people in this context, We are not talking about any specific real-world community, culture, or ethnicity. We are not talking about indigenous tribes, rural families, or the unhoused. We are not painting any group of actual people as monsters. What we are talking about is a horror theory, a blend of folklore, urban legend, and the human fear of being watched by something that lives beyond the edge of the map. The feral people of this story are BOOGEYMEN. Dark reflections, creatures of the deep woods that might as well have stepped out of a nightmare, even if, in some twisted way, they began as human. With that understood, listen to how search and rescue veterans talk when the recorder is off. You are sitting at a bar in a small mountain town. It is late. The tourists have gone back to their motels. The only people left are locals and the men and women in faded green uniforms with the emblem of a National Park Service or the Forest Service on their sleeves. Their faces are lined. Their eyes are tired. You buy one a drink. You tell him you appreciate what he does. You mention, very casually, that you have heard some strange stories about people going missing in the park. If he likes you, and if you have the right kind of silence, he might start to talk, not about statistics or press releases, but about the times he still dreams about. He will tell you about a search for a missing boy, how they found one of the kid's shoes on top of a boulder far too high for him to climb, how it was placed neatly, as if set there by a careful hand. No scuff marks on the rock, no blood, no tracks. He will tell you about a call-out in late fall, when they were in deep backcountry and heard, far off in the timber, what sounded like a woman screaming. They pushed toward it, calling out, their voices echoing in the cold air. The screams stopped, replaced by laughter. Not human laughter. Not exactly. Something that started human and stretched into something else. High, then low, mocking. Repeating sounds they had made, echoing their names back at them in a broken, sing-song voice. He will tell you about climbing a ridge at dawn to get a radio signal and seeing, on the far slope, a line of figures standing perfectly still just inside the tree line, too far to make out clearly. Not hikers, not rangers, just watchers. When he looked away to adjust the antenna, then looked back, they were gone. In more than one case, searchers have stumbled across things in the backcountry that do not fit any official narrative at all. A deadfall shelter built far from any trail, reinforced with scavenged tarps and tent fabric, containing a pile of stolen backpacks, clothing, gear from brands that disappeared off the market years ago. Candy wrappers so old the logos are from a different era. A broken GPS unit. A knife with dried, dark stains. In the corner, a little altar made of stacked stones, decorated with bits of bright cloth and plastic toys that looked very much like they came from the bedside of a child who once slept in a national park campground and never woke up in his own bed again, or a cave whose entrance is cleverly hidden by brush and fallen logs. Inside, the smell hits you first. Rot, unwashed bodies, smoke from fires built with green wood, bones piled in one corner, animal bones, mostly, a scattering of human teeth among them, cracked and brown. No fire ring, no evidence of campers in the official sense. Just the sense that you have intruded into someone else's home, someone who does not want to be seen. Officially, these discoveries are logged as evidence of illegal hunting camps, drug operations, or abandoned squatter sites. Unofficially, they feed something else. The idea that there are eyes in the forest that never come into town, bodies that never walk down Main Street. People live, we can still use that word, who live their entire lives in the shadows between the trees and see anyone who walks into their territory as one thing: meat. There is a story that circulates among backcountry law enforcement officers. Different parks tell it with slightly different details, but the core is the same. A ranger is conducting a solo patrol on horseback in a remote part of a park. It is late summer. The days are long. He rides along old service roads and game trails, checking for illegal camps, poachers, and lost hikers. He crests a ridge and sees smoke in the distance, curling up through the pines from a drainage that is not on any map. No official campsite lies in that direction. No backcountry permit has been issued for that basin. He decides to check it out. As he descends into the drainage, the forest goes unnaturally quiet. The normal background noise of birds and insects fades. Even his horse starts to get jittery, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. He ties the horse and goes the rest of the way, on foot. The smoke is coming from a pit fire built in the middle of a clearing. Around it, lean-tos made of branches and tarps lean against the trunks of trees. There are no tents, no sleeping bags, just piles of old blankets and furs. He calls out, announcing himself, hand resting lightly on the butt of his sidearm. No one answers. He moves closer. The camp is deserted, but it looks recently used. The fire is still smoldering. There are gnawed bones scattered around the pit. The cuts on them are not clean, like a hunter's. They are jagged, as if torn apart by teeth and rocks. Among the bones, he sees something that turns his stomach. A piece of bright pink plastic from a child's shoe, a hair tie with glitter, a crushed aluminum can from a brand of soda that went out of production a decade ago. On a low branch above the fire, something hangs from a string. He thinks, for one insane second, that it is a doll. It is not. It is a shriveled human hand, small as a child's, the skin dried and tight. like a grotesque charm. His radio crackles on his shoulder, loud in the silence. Something moves in the brush behind him. He turns, but there is nothing there. Only the sense that he is being studied by many eyes at once from the shadows beneath the firs. He backs away, heart pounding, never turning his back fully on the tree line. When he reaches his horse, he mounts up and rides out fast, not looking over his shoulder. Back at headquarters, he reports the illegal camp, the remains, the evidence. A team goes back with him. The camp is gone. The fire pit is filled in. The cleared ground is raked over. The bone fragments are gone. The hanging object is gone. Even the smoke smell is faint. The only sign anything was there at all is a depression where the fire had been, and a small, pink scrap of plastic caught in a root. No arrests are made. No incident report is ever released to the public. Around a table in the back of a bar, after a few drinks, that ranger will lean in and say, in a hoarse voice, "They were there, and they knew we were coming back." One of the most chilling parts of the feral people theory is not what they are supposed to do, but what they are supposed to know. They know, the theory says, how search teams operate. They know the sound of helicopter rotors and truck engines. They recognize the blaze orange of SAR vests from miles away. They have watched from ridges and brush as grid searches swept under them. They have seen which areas dogs are taken through and which are considered too dangerous, too steep, or too far to bother with. They understand the patterns. So when they take someone, they take them in ways and in places that they know will leave as little trace as possible. They pull them off trails where the ground is hardpan and rock, leaving no footprints. They use sudden weather to their advantage, snatching people just before sleet, snow, or heavy rain wipe away scent and tracks. They move high and deep into terrain where rescuers cannot safely go, into vertical cliff bands, blow down fields, and slot canyons. And sometimes, if you believe the stories, they play with the search. They leave clothing folded in places that make no sense, far from where anyone could have walked barefoot. They dump bodies days later at the edge of established search zones, as if to say, you never even came close. There are modern, documented cases of people who have gone missing in the woods, then reappeared hours or days later with strange stories they cannot fully explain. Children, especially. One very young child vanished from a campsite near a creek. His parents swore he had been within sight the whole time. Then they glanced away for a moment, and he was gone. A massive search began. Hours later, he was found, unharmed, sitting under a tree several miles away, up a steep slope that searchers had written off as impossible for a toddler. He had no scratches, no torn clothes, no dirt on his socks. When they asked him what happened, he said, "A big man with funny eyes had taken him by the hand and led him up the mountain. The man, he said, talked in a strange way, like his words were broken. He offered the boy berries that tasted bad. When the boy refused to eat them, the man got angry. Eventually, the big man went to sleep like a rock, and the boy slipped away. Investigators chalk this up to a child's imagination, trying to make sense of being lost and scared. But the description, a man who is man-shaped but not quite human in behavior or speech, living up where no one is supposed to live, gets filed away in the mental drawer marked feral people by those who believe. There is another case from decades ago of a small boy who disappeared near a boulder field. Searchers looked for days, no trace. Then, days later, they found his body, sitting upright against a tree, almost as if posed, several miles away, across ridges and ravines. His clothes were on, but his shoes were gone. His feet were clean. Near him, a pile of berries and small bones lay on a flat rock, as if someone had been eating there. The coroner listed exposure as the cause of death. No one explained how he had traveled that distance barefoot through rough terrain without a single cut, or whether he had been alone. Think back now to the national parks you have visited. The scenic pullouts, the crowded overlooks, the asphalt running like a gray ribbon through ancient stone and forest. Most of the people you see never step more than a few hundred feet from their cars. They snap photographs, buy souvenirs, and leave. But there are others, the backpackers, the climbers, the hunters, who go deeper. They follow narrow trails along ridges where one misstep means death. They drop into canyons where sunlight barely touches the moss. They bushwhack through timber so thick you cannot see the sky. Out there, the signs warning you to stay on trail are not just about erosion. They are boundaries, lines between the part of the park that belongs, more or less, to us, and the part that might still belong to something else. Talk to enough older rangers off the record, and you will hear hints of an unofficial rule. We search for the missing. We do not chase ghosts. They will tell you about areas they do not like to go into without backup. Valleys that feel wrong. Hollows where radio communication always fails. Places where, as one veteran put it, you never feel like the only one there, even when you are. They will also tell you something else, if you press, that they are strongly discouraged from talking to the media, or even to families, about anything that might be considered strange or unexplained about a disappearance. Not because there is a government conspiracy with secret files on feral people, but because the agencies that manage America's public lands have one overriding fear: panic. If an official ever stood at a podium and said, "Yes, sometimes people go missing under bizarre conditions we cannot explain, in areas where we have found evidence of other humans living illegally off-grid for years, possibly preying on visitors. What do you think would happen? Tourism would crater. Lawsuits would explode. Politicians would demand action that the underfunded, overstretched park services could not deliver. It is far easier and far safer to keep the language dry and clinical. Subject became separated from party. Remains located in steep, remote terrain. Death appears to be consistent with exposure. Missing 411 cases vanish into statistics. The feral people theory, anyone in uniform believes it is left to campfire talks and late-night YouTube channels. Here is the truth that sits under all of this, like bedrock under thin soil. The wilderness does not owe you safety. Those millions of acres on the maps, the green patches and white blanks that look so tempting when you are planning a trip are not theme parks. They are not controlled environments. They are, in many places, still wild enough that you can walk a mile off a road and be in a place where no human has set foot in years. That is what draws us. That is also what kills us. Rockfalls, hypothermia, flash floods, hidden cliffs, hypoxia, dehydration, bears, mountain lions, snakes, even other humans, murderers, criminals on the run. People who go into the woods to do violence away from cameras and witnesses. You do not need feral people to explain why hikers never come home. But the feral people theory is not about probability. It is about possibility. It is about the tiny, persistent voice in the back of your brain that asks, when you unzip your tent in the dark and hear a twig snap just beyond the circle of your headlamp, what if something out there is watching me from so close I could touch it with a walking stick? What if it has been watching campers for generations? What if it has learned to wait until you look away for just 1 second? So what should you do with all of this? You could shrug it off. Write it all off as internet creepypasta and sensationalized campfire stories. Go on your vacations, hike your hikes. Assume that the trail signs and visitor center maps and cheery ranger talks mean you are inside a controlled safety bubble. Or you could let it make you just a little more cautious. Not paranoid, not frozen, just aware. Stay on the trail, especially with kids. Do not let small children run out of sight, even just around the bend. Watch the weather. If the sky changes fast, turn back. Do not hike alone deep in the back country without telling anyone where you are going and when you will be back. Pay attention to your instincts. If a valley or ravine feels wrong, oppressively, quiet, heavy, acute, as if the air itself is thick with warning, listen to that feeling. Because from a rational point of view, those habits will protect you from the very real, very mundane dangers of the wilderness. And from a darker point of view, if there is anything else out there hidden in the caves, watching from the ridgelines, listening from the tree line, as children laugh along the trailet, might respect the lines we draw when we stay in the open, noisy human world of marked paths and signed overlooks. The cases we talk about when we say missing 411 are the ones where someone crossed a line, sometimes deliberately, sometimes in a heartbeat of inattention, sometimes because something reached out from the shadows of the national parks we think we own, and reminded us that ownership is an illusion. The next time you drive through a park gate and smile at the ranger in the kiosk, remember this. Beyond the visitor center, beyond the picnic areas, beyond the busy parking lots, the land rolls on and on. Ridges fold over ridges. Valleys cut deep. Trees crowd together, so thick they make their own night. In that vastness, there are places no bootprint has marked in years. In that vastness, people vanish. In that vastness, according to one unthinkable theory, there are eyes that have never stared at a screen, never seen a city, never listened to anything but the wind and the whimpering of prey. They are up there, the theory says. They are watching the roads, the trailheads, the campgrounds. They are listening for the moment when a father looks away from his child to check a map. For the second, when a hiker takes off her boots to dip her feet in a clear mountain stream, setting them neatly beside a rock. For the time when the last flashlight goes dark in a campground and the forest closes in. Missing 411 is a list of names and dates and coordinates. The feral people theory is the story we tell ourselves when those names and dates and coordinates refuse to make sense. Whether it is true or not, whether there really are hands on the cliffs above the trails and eyes in the dark timber. One thing is not theory at all. When you step past the boundary where the pavement ends and the dirt begins, you are not just entering a park. You are stepping into a place where, for all our maps and laws and campgrounds, we are still guests. And not all of the hosts are friendly.